What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millzy Revisits, the show where I go back through and talk about rebuilding and retooling all the decks that I have, both in my main box and in my test box. And today's kind of a fun one because this is going to be the first of a couple decks where I'm going to do a physical deck tech. It's not just going to be on Moxfield on my PC, but this one's a little bit different because the keen eye would notice that this Go-Shintai of Life's Origin, who's going to be our commander today, is a little different than you'd expect. I talked a little bit in my Tyranids video, so if you're interested, go ahead and take a look at that video about how I joined a custom community who uses tools to change framings on card, make entire decks of cards more thematic together. Started off with the 40k decks, but I've also run into a lot of other themes. And there wasn't one deck I thought could be more cool as a theme than shrines, right? The shrines of this deck that are kind of enigmatic, of these enchantments that all work together. But I loved the neon frame from Kamigawa. I thought it was such a cool frame, and I thought it fit the shrines so well and what they're trying to accomplish. So today for you, I have not only my Millzy Revisits episode, but I have a deck tech of my current shrines list, all in the Neon Dynasty frame. Now, if you're interested in the card images themselves, if you'd like to proxy them or use them for your own uses, I'm going to put a link down in the description to my Google Drive. It's going to have all of the images for you to use, as well as a link to a website where you can take those images, print them 3x3 on a paper and cut them out. If it's something you want to do, that's how I use, that's what I do for all of my proxies, to use them in my deck. But further ado, let's get in to the deck. So Go-Shintai Shrines is a very interesting Enchantress deck. I like to think of Go-Shintai as a kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine, where we're trying to assemble all of our pieces, or enough of our pieces, to make a difference in the game. So every shrine has an ability that gets better with the more shrines that you have. The cool part about Go-Shintai of Life's Origin, our newest shrine commander, is that it makes 1/1 shrine enchantment creature tokens every time a non-token shrine enters the battlefield. What that does is it increases the number of shrines that you have access to, and basically allows all of your effects to get better. So the three series of shrines that we've gotten so far from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we got the Go-Shintai Legendary Shrine creatures. All of these are creatures with abilities, but their biggest ability is at the end step, we can pay a single colorless mana, and each of them do effect depending on how many shrines you control, making tokens, dealing damage to a target player or planeswalker, milling cards, destroying a creature with toughness X or less, or putting a counters on a shrine you control. These guys are really cool in a lot of ways because they can turn that extra mana that you have into some abilities, but also the damage in destroying the toughness on creatures can come into a lot of important if you're trying to get rid of some of those pesky things that your opponents have. Getting into the Sanctums, these were released in M21. The Sanctums were really what pushed most people into making a Shrines deck. The M21 Shrines are enchantments, legendary enchantments, just like the Kamigawa ones originally. But a lot of them introduced new good things. The blue one draws just like the original Home did. The black one, though, has each of our opponents lose X life and we gain X life, where X is the number of shrines we control. Stonefangs tends to be one of those cards that helps you end the game by more or less showing your opponents, hey, on my turn, you're going to lose 8 or 10 life and I'm going to gain that life. And that incremental loss is what helps you with the game. Shatter Heights can deal damage. Fruitful Harvest gets you X amount of mana of any one color, where X is the number of shrines you control, which just pushes your turns forward, allows you to get more mana on your turn. And then the big one, we got an M21 that makes the deck very good, is Sanctum of All. At the beginning of our upkeep, we could search our library or graveyard for a shrine card and put it on the battlefield. And then if we search, we shuffle. And then if the ability of another shrine triggers while we control 6 or more shrines, it triggers an additional time. Shrine of All is one of the key shrines, or Sanctum of All's the key shrine we're looking to get every game if we can. But if we can't, we want to flood the board with the other shrines and get their value. And then moving on to the final Champions Kamigawa shrines, our original shrines. These guys are a little bit different. They were the first to get designed, but a lot of them are really good, gaining us 2 life for each shrine, drawing a card for each shrine. Now, the note here with this honed in, between the Sanctum and the honed in here, is that honed in just draws us the card Sanctum of Calm Waters, says you may draw, and if you draw, you have to discard ones. The bad part about honed in of seeing ones is you have to draw. You have no choice. Knight's Reach, target opponent has to discard a card for each shrine you control. This is going to help you just get cards out of people's hands. Infinite Rage automatically deals damage to any target, where Sanctum of Shadow Heights, we have to pay 1, and then it's only a creature or planeswalker, so that's pretty cool about that one. Honed's a Life Web, we get a 1/1 for each shrine we control, whereas on the one here, we have to pay 1 to do that, and then, so those were the original 5. So 17 shrines in total, or 16, I apologize, shrines in total, now including Go-Shintai as our 17, means we have 17 permanents in our deck that have the shrine creature type. And I know what you're thinking, which is that maybe not be enough, but I think with enough of them, and with Go-Shintai making the creature tokens every time they come in, it helps you get a good board presence ready to go. And the coolest part about Go-Shintai is you could pay Wooburg, tap it, and get 1 back from your graveyard. Yes, Shrine of All can get them out of our graveyard as well, but what's cool is that allows us to kind of recycle them, bring them back, and not only that, but it also lets us get other enchantment cards from our graveyard, which is equally as important. Going into the creatures, I'm just going to go through these really quickly, talk about why I think they fit. Tessin Champion, pretty much a staple when it comes to most Enchantress decks. Constellation, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. The drawing a card is almost as good as that +1/+1 counter, but in all reality, Tessin Champion just gets big and becomes another threat that they have to deal with. It is not an enchantment itself, which kind of stinks, but I think the value and the utility it gets as another Enchantress that draws you a card is really important. Sakashima of Thousand Faces is great because we can copy Go-Shintai, we can copy any of the shrines that are creatures, but we can also just copy any other creature we control. And that's important because we do have some cards in our deck we really care about, and I think Sakashima, creatures we care about, I think Sakashima does a good job with that. Destiny Spinner, creatures and enchantments we control can't be countered, and then for 4 mana we can turn a land into an XX, where X is the number of enchantments we control. This is a great way to kind of help end the game and push our strategy forward. Sanctum Weaver, one of the better enchantment creatures in our deck, taps for X mana of any 1 color, where X is the number of enchantments we control. We'll talk a little bit later, but we have a couple enchantments in this deck that are going to make Sanctum Weaver go infinite on mana, and that's going to help us push forward, dump a bunch of things in, and end the game. Dryad of the Illusion Grove, letting us play an additional land on each of our turns, and then having all of our lands have every basic land type, which is going to help with some of our lands later, and we'll talk about that. Joda the Unifier, of course, I think a great commander in its own right, but in this deck gets even better because remember, all of our Go-Shintai creatures are legendary, and a lot of the other creatures in our deck that we'll talk about here in a second are legendary, but whenever we cast a legendary spell from our hand, we get to basically cascade for a legendary spell that has less value. And that's great because all of our shrines are legendary, and we do have other cards in the deck we're playing that are legendary. And so Joda does help with that, but then giving all of our legendary creatures +X, where X is the number of legendary creatures we control, makes all of our Go-Shintai creatures even better because they're going to get bigger and harder to deal with. We have Sithis, Harvest Hand, probably a great commander in its own right, probably one of the best cards in this deck for gaining us life and drawing us cards whenever we cast enchantments, and she is an enchantment as well, also a legendary for the purpose of Joda. Zur, Eternal Schemer, one of the new cards from Dominaria United, and one of my favorites in this deck, comes down and gives all enchantment creatures we control Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. This is great because all of our shrine tokens we make are enchantments. All of those shrines, of course, that are creatures are enchantments, and most of these creatures are enchantments, which means that almost all of them are going to have those abilities. And then for 2 mana, we can make one of the normal shrines that aren't a creature into a creature, and then that just promotes that value even more. The cool part is with enough mana, we can make all of our shrines and all other non-aura enchantments we control creatures, and also swing out that way if we needed to. And then Jukai Naturalist. Jukai Naturalist is great because it reduces the cost of our enchantments. Some of those shrines are a teeny bit expensive, so what I like about Jukai Naturalist is it just helps kind of bring down that cost just a teeny bit on some of those shrines and pushes our strategy forward. Going into the spells, I think some ramp is relevant, so we're playing just 3 ramp spells: Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, and Farseek. 3 Visits and Nature's Lore in here because when we talk about our lands, we're playing some lands that have the forest type, so this is great to grab those. And then Farseek can grab a land that has any of the other types. So we're going to talk, when we get to the lands, we'll talk about how important those are. A couple ways to search in Demonic Tutor and Imperial Seal. These guys are in here because if we see Sanctum Weaver, we want to get that combo piece, and they're pretty much probably in here only to tutor for those combo pieces. It's what sets us forward, it's what gets the game going, and it's what leads us towards one of our win cons. And one of those win cons is Approach of the Second Sun. A lot of people have mixed opinions about Approach of the Second Sun, but it's one of the best ways to do it. Once we set the Enchantress game plan up, we have so many ways to draw cards, and so with infinite mana and ways to draw cards, we're going to win via Approach to the Second Sun. And then we have Karn's Temporal Sundering, can get rid of a permanent by bouncing it and then give us an extra turn. Karn's Temporal Sundering is just great because we're not playing a ton of extra turn effects, but once we have a really big turn, if we can't do anything else, it's always great to give ourselves another turn to keep going and printing the value that this deck has a very good time doing. Getting into our instance, we have a couple different types. We have some removal, an Assassin's Trophy, and Anguish Unmaking. Both hit any type of permanent. Anguish exiles, Assassin's Trophy only destroys but gives our opponent that land. We're playing Cyclonic Rift, help ourselves push our creatures through if we need to. Flawless Maneuver and Heroic Intervention to protect our creatures with Flawless Maneuver and Heroic Intervention with all of our permanents. That's great because if somebody tries to target one of our things and we don't have something like Sterling Grove out, which we'll talk about in a second, that protects us there. And then Vamp and Enlightened Tutor to help us go get for things. Vamp can go get anything, Enlightened Tutor can only get artifact or enchantments, but since most of our deck are artifact or enchantments, E-Tutor does a very good job at getting ourselves what we need. Getting into the enchantments, actually let's do the artifacts first. We're just playing 2. Arcane Signet and Chromatic Lantern. These are the only 2 we're playing. 1 Arcane Signet because it taps for any color that helps us with Go-Shintai since it's all 5 colors. And then Chromatic Lantern because then it allows all of our lands to tap for any colors just to help kind of fix our mana if we're having issues. We talked about infinite mana with Sanctum Weaver, and we have 3 cards that do it. Gauntlets of Light, which allows her to untap for 3 white mana, and then Freed from the Real and Pemenzora, who both let Sanctum Weaver do it for 1 single blue mana. These are the ones we're looking for, and these are very helpful to start setting up Sanctum Weaver and getting cards down. We would simply tap Sanctum Weaver for Gauntlets of Light to start. We would tap for white and then untap her for white, and hopefully we have enough enchantments that we're netting a mana each time, and that's what allows us to go infinite. With Freed from the Real and Pemenzora, well, of course, with Sanctum Weaver in this out, we're always going to have at least 2, which means it's easier to go infinite with these 2 and kind of stack up the mana that way. These are 3 of the most important enchantments in our deck so that we can get the game plan moving. Next up, we'll go into some of our card draw, or cards that help us draw. We're playing the Smothering Tithe, Heuristic Study, and Mystic Remora package, mainly because we are a deck that needs our 5 colors, so we need to be drawing and getting lands down. I've chose to kind of, we'll talk about it when we get in the land section, I've chose to play a few more of the tap lands than others, so I think the added card draw with Heuristic Study and Mystic Remora do help us out with that. Smothering Tithe, that just allows us to gain value for our opponents. We're playing Sylvan Library and Miri's Guile. Both of these 2 allow us to look at the cards that we're drawing and hopefully influence what we're drawing at the start of the turn, which is going to help a ton. And then Enchantress's Presence comes down and helps us just draw every time we cast an enchantment spell. And those are very useful because we're going to be casting a lot of enchantments in this deck. For removal, we've got Darksteel Mutation and Imprisoned in the Moon as some more removal. These guys are on enchantments, so these guys proc all of our enchantment triggers, but these are great just because they completely lock down whatever it is we're trying to remove. Imprison in the Moon can also lock down planeswalkers or lands, not just creatures. For some more ramp, we're playing Wild Growth and Fertile Ground. These 2 enchant lands and allow us to tap them for additional things, as well as we're playing Burgeoning and Exploration just to try to play as many lands as we can. Like I said, we're choosing to play into the triomes and things like that, so we want to make sure that our lands can come in more often. Exploration helps us play an extra one each turn, whereas Burgeoning can help us kind of reduce the amount of cards in our hand while playing them on our opponent's turn. For a little bit of shutting down our opponents, we have a Ghostly Prison and Stony Silence. Stony Silence does look like a little bit of a non-bow when we have things like Smothering Tithe and Arcane Signet in our deck, but since most of our cards aren't artifacts, we don't mind playing the Stony Silence and shutting down our opponents, and then Ghostly Prison just tries to stop our opponents from hitting us a little bit. We're playing one of my favorite enchantments in this deck in Solitary Confinement. Beginning of our upkeep, sacrifice it unless we discard a card. Hopefully we're going to be drawing enough cards that that's not going to matter. Skip your draw step, you have Shroud, and prevent all damage that will be dealt to you. Solitary Confinement is a pillow for it, and one of the best cards in our deck for that reason, and then we're also playing Sphere of Safety as well. So we're just trying to stop our opponents from attacking us as much as possible. This isn't going to stop this would stop any damage combos, but Sphere of Safety, of course, and Ghostly Prison would not stop any damage combos, but I think most of the time we want to stop ourselves from getting attacked by those big decks. Luminarch Ascension, good way to make some tokens, help protect us if need be. Intangible Virtue, going to give all of our Shrine tokens and the rest of our tokens +1/+1 in Vigilance. Mirari's Wake, going to not only double our mana when we tap it, but give all of our creatures +1/+1. Crippler's Wraith, going to allow all of our creatures to tap for mana, which is only going to get better the more Shrine tokens we have. And then Sterling Grove, one of the most well-known Enchantress enchantments, giving all of our other enchantments Shroud, and then we can sack one, pay one and sack it, and go get a enchantment of our choice on top. Most of the time with Sterling Grove, I use that to go get Sanctum of All, get it on top, and then get it down when needed. But more often than not, Sterling Grove really helps us out because it's going to give all of our enchantments Shroud and stop our opponents from removing them when we don't want them removed, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want our enchantments removed. We want to keep them on the battlefield. All right, we're getting into lands, and we're playing the lands that I think most people would expect us to play, playing all 10 fetch lands. I tried to build a mana base for this deck that didn't include the fetch lands, but I realized very quickly that the fetch lands do one thing very properly, and that's that getting us one of either two colors in conjunction with the triomes allows us to fix our mana a little bit better than you would expect otherwise. So I'm playing all 10 fetches, all 10 triomes, and then the 5 lands from Streets of New Capenna. I know that this means that there are going to be turns where we fall a turn behind because we're playing in tapped these tri-lands as opposed to playing in regular dual lands. But I think the difference is that having all of these be 3 color and having all of those fetches give us a mana of either color means we're going to be able to find the colors that we need in these tri-lands. The cool part is almost half of these tri-lands have the forest type, which means those, or half of them do, which means Farseek and 3 Visits are going to be able to get any of these, as well as that Farseek is going to be able to get any of these tri-lands. So that's great because we're going to be able to get them when we need them. And because I am aware that 10 fetch lands plus 3, 2 or 3 removal spells means that we don't have enough lands to actually fetch. We're playing just a couple shock lands so that we have extra targets. All 4 of the shock lands also have the forest type. That way, if we want to go fetch something and shock it in with a fetch land, we can actually do that and use that mana this turn. And then the other thing we're playing is 5 of the check lands. The check lands all have green because green is our most important color in our deck as far as a lot of our support cards, as well as, when possible, each of them contain either white or blue because those are our 2 secondary colors that a lot of our cards are in. We also threw in Woodland Cemetery just to give us some black because, of course, some of our tutors are in black and therefore kind of a little bit important when it comes to searching and things like that. And then we do have just a few utility lands. We're playing Command Tower, Mana Confluence, and City of Brass. These 3 tap for any color. The City of Brass and the Mana Confluence do hurt us, but there are a lot of cards in our deck like Sithis that gain us life when we cast enchantments, and so we're not as worried about that incremental life loss. We have Plaza of Heroes, because remember, most of our enchantments are legendary, which means Plaza of Heroes is going to tap for any color for that. But then, more often than not, we're going to have a Shrine Out being a legendary permanent, so Plaza of Heroes is going to tap for something when that is out. And then our 5th utility land is Serra Sanctum, mainly because I own a copy of one for some other Enchantress decks that I have. But Serra Sanctum gets even better in this deck because the wider our board is, the more it taps for, and the better it gets. So that, friends, is the visual deck tech for Go-Shintai Shrines. I'd love to know what you guys think of my list down in the description. Like I said, there's going to be a link to this deck tech where you can see the deck list, so you can see what's in it visually if you didn't want to completely look at all of the visual stuff here, like I said, as well as the link to the actual proxies themselves. I had a ton of fun making the proxies for these, deciding on what cards were going to be in the deck, and kind of making my changes. I've played this deck a couple times and it's ran very well. You have to remember, with 5-color decks, a lot of your experience running a deck is going to depend on how well you can fit your colors together, how well you can get your mana moving. So don't be immediately discouraged by the first few hands you draw, especially while you're getting used to the deck, because it can be kind of hard to get a sense of what the deck's trying to do if you're not used to it yet. But I think once you get used to the deck, you'll know what lands you need, what cards you need, and how to move. I want to really talk about my considering board, because it does have some custom proxies as well. Talk about why the cards aren't in the deck and what I would be looking for. The first is Paradox Haze, which I feel like a lot of people is going to be really surprised isn't in the deck. Paradox Haze, I think, was a little bit more important when all we had was the Sanctums and the Hondens. But I think with the other cards we have now, Paradox Haze to me isn't as much of an auto-include as it was before. I really like Paradox Haze, and I could see a scenario where in the games where I'm seeing a lot of the Sanctums and I want to use their abilities, I can see why searching for a Paradox Haze would make it even better. I think the way we can make Paradox Haze better in the deck is by adding more extra turn support, and then we would not only just get double the upkeeps, but we would get more double upkeeps. Weaver of Harmony from Kamigawa can copy Go-Shintai's trigger, or copy a lot of triggers from our shrines. I love the look of Weaver of Harmony. I'm just trying a few other things in its spot. Mainly, I want to see how I cut it for Jukai Naturalist. I want to see what the difference is there. And if I don't think that it's doing well enough, I will quickly put Weaver of Harmony back in. Aura Shard seems like a pretty good shot here. Whenever a creature enters, destroy target artifact or enchantment. I feel like it's probably going to be pretty good to shut down our opponent's combos that use artifacts and enchantments, but I'm not sure on it yet. I have so many other spots I like. Concordant Crossroads was in here as a way to end the game when we're going wide and we have all of these shrine tokens, and we have all of these angel tokens, and we have all of these things that we're making. Concordant Crossroads can gill all our creatures haste and end the game. It just got taken out to try to see if we could make our mana base a little bit more consistent and our draws a little bit more consistent with like Mystic Remora and Migreescyle. So if I find that those don't do as well of a job, I think Crossroads comes back in. Grasp of Fate, such a great removal card. I think it sees its spot. I'm just trying the more single target stuff with Darksteel first, and then we'll see if this runs well. Spirit of Resistance, as long as you control a permanent of each color, prevent all damage to be dealt to you. I can see this coming back in pretty quickly. I just want to see if I find I need another one of these things and I always have a permanent of each color. I think Resistance is a slam dunk. Whirlwind of Thought, drawing us a card every time we cast a non-creature spell. I think this becomes probably good. I think Ristic Study Mystic Memoria probably does us a little better because we want some of the card draw on our opponent's turns to help us set up, but I really like the look of it. Eidolon of Blossoms, whenever it or another enchantment comes in, draw a card. This is going to be another copy of the, almost even better copy of Enchantress's Presence, but kind of another copy of that Cetessan Champion type thing where every time an enchantment comes in, we draw a card. I really like Eidolon of Blossoms, but I cut it to see if we could try to make some of those cards that are dependent on our opponent's draw first, and then maybe, just maybe, if those aren't, if we don't see as much luck in a Mystic Remora, we can bring the Eidolon of Blossoms back in. Resurgent Belief, getting enchantments back from our graveyard, seems like it could be pretty darn important. So we will see how often our enchantments get blown up, and if they get blown up pretty often, we need to bring them back. Then I think Resurgent Belief pretty much is unassumingly going to come back in as soon as possible. But in the meta I mostly play in with the deck, I tend to have the opportunity to kind of just build up without mass removal. So as I've been starting to go to shops with the deck, if I see more mass removal, I think I'll bring Resurgent Belief back in. And then Utopia Sprawl, just as another enchantment that helps ramp. The other downside to Utopia Sprawl is it has to enchant a forest, but like I said, most of the time that first fetch land we see is getting a Triome that has a forest type anyway, because we want to get that green mana. And so I think Utopia Sprawl could be good in another slot in the deck. But at the moment, I am just not 100% sure on whether or not I need a third one. I have been doing pretty well with the ramp we have already, but I think with the added card draw on our opponent's turns and exploration and burgeoning, we may not need the Utopia Sprawl for that. But that, guys, like I said, is my Shrines list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Are there any cards that I'm not playing in my Shrines list that I should? What do you think I should change about the list? And also, what do you think of the proxies? Do you like an idea like this? Is this something that you would want your opponents to, would you be okay with your opponents playing across from you? Is this something you would support as long as they own all of the cards? Or, like I said, a lot of these cards would be in my staple binders. They'd be cards that I actually have. They just wouldn't be in the sleeves. Would you be okay with your opponents doing something like this? Or let me know what you think of that down in the comments. I'd love to know. I think something like this is what makes Commander cool, because we get to put our own spin, our own personality into our decks. And so that's why I love something like this. But if you like the look of this, there's more coming. I've got not only the Tyranids one, which I talked about in the Tyranids episode, but I do have a couple other decks that I've been doing or trying to do this with as well. I will be letting you guys know in the future. Like I said, links to the proxies and the site to use to print them are going to be down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Drop me a like and a subscribe if you want to see more Commander content. I'm very excited for XCOV1 starting next week, and I cannot wait. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.